So, when was the last time you sat still without reaching out for your phone, waiting for, just a few minutes or a few seconds or even a single breath? Probably you can't remember that, right? There's always an urge to reach out to the phone. And that is what we're going to talk about today from the perspective of author Aldous Huxley. And he wrote almost 100 years ago, which is true in today's time. So let's visit that. So every generation thinks it invented distraction, the same way it thinks it invented heartbreak. But Aldous Huxley back in 1930s saw something we are only now living through completely. He didn't imagine a world that would crush people with pain. No, he imagined something even quieter, a world that would keep people obedient by entertaining them, not oppressed, but distracted. He wasn't wrong, we can see now. He was just early. Huxley said a truly efficient system of control wouldn't need slaves forced into submission. It would have slaves who love their own captivity. George Orwell, he feared a world that banned books. But Huxley feared a world where no one would want to read them. That is even more dangerous. Distraction is not something that happens to us from outside, as we might think. It is a negotiation we have with ourselves every waking hour. Being alone with our own thought is for most of us, it's quietly unbearable. Most of us can't stand ourselves. And studies show that people would rather shock themselves than sit alone doing nothing for 15 minutes. Can you believe that? And that's true. And I'm sure you can agree with that. Huxley actually knew this decades before there was a data for it. He wasn't describing us, actually, he was diagnosing us. Think about what surfaces in unoccupied time. When you're by yourself, what comes out? Grief, regret, and that quiet question of whether your life is actually going somewhere. So, distraction is medicine for wound most of us would rather not look at directly. Let me repeat. Distraction is medicine for a wound most of us would rather not look at directly, because every time we reach for our phone in the elevator, we are performing a small act of avoidance. And avoidance, when repeated enough times, becomes a personality. In the book Brave New World by Huxley, people were given a drug called Soma. Whenever discomfort threatened to show up, no need for anger, grief, or boredom, just take Soma. Soma dissolve it all instantly. So, a population sedated by a pleasure doesn't need a police force. It polices itself. We don't have Soma right now, but we have something just as effective, and it requires no chemistry at all. And what is that? Well, infinite scroll, autoplay, and the algorithms built to find whatever keeps our thumb moving. And it actually adjusts in a real time to keep us comfortable and compliant. Just look at your notification tonight or right after you finish watching this video. Isn't that the accurate description of most of our evenings, right? So attention actually might be the only thing any of us actually owns, not our possessions, not our relationship even, but the ability to direct our awareness towards one thing instead of another. And Simon Weil said that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. If that's true, then losing it piece by piece is the slow loss of our capacity to love anything at all, including ourselves. So, Huxley was describing what we now call the attention economy. Yes, we all know that, right? The attention economy. It is an industry whose profits depend on our inability to look away. They want us to constantly glued to the phone, and we all are. And we are the product. We are sold off piece by piece to people who have calculated exactly how fragile our focus really is, and they make it even more fragile by their techniques. And there is an old idea older than Huxley, and that idea is boredom isn't the enemy, it is a doorway. Kierkegaard believed it was the root of much of what goes wrong in us, but that facing it honestly was the start of an honest life. Even Pascal believed that most of our problems came down to one failure, and that failure is not being able to sit quietly in a room alone. Unoccupied time is not empty, it is full of exactly what a person needs to become someone instead of simply performing someone. So, Huxley wrote that the truth will set you free, and we have heard that before, and most people want nothing more than to be excused from effort of looking for it. Not cynical but accurate description. Freedom was never the problem, effort was. So distraction is what finally solved effort's inconvenience at the cost of what everything effort was for. So what happens to someone who never sits with discomfort? Well, they're not bad people, they're just shallow people, a surface with nothing tested underneath it. Because see, the depth is built slowly in the exact minutes we now spend somewhere else, which is mainly in front of the phone screen. And someone who has never been bored has also never found out what they actually think, as opposed to what they are simply been shown. This is why the Huxley's warning still lands almost 100 years later. Can you believe? He didn't predict a world that would punish thinking. No, he predicted the world that would make thinking unnecessary, then unfamiliar, and then unbearable. So people won't think. So the way any unused capacity eventually becomes unbearable to pick back up. So we will reach to a point where it will be very difficult to even start thinking on our own. So let me leave you with this. When was the last time you held a thought long enough for it to become uncomfortable? Long enough that it asks something of you. If you can't remember, that's not a personal failure. It might just be the machine working exactly as it was designed to. I'm sure you're getting what I'm talking about. The discomfort we have spent our whole lives running from was never really our enemy. Did you get that? It might have been the only honest teacher we ever had, and Huxley knew that. He wrote an entire imagined world to make sure we would notice that. The only question left is whether we intend to keep proving him right or finally sit still long enough to prove him wrong. So let me know if you reach to the end of the video and prove Huxley wrong. Thank you for watching. Have a great life ahead.